Hello everyone, welcome back. Tom with Capo Fetish. Today on the channel, we're going to talk about 5 artists that released 3 seminal albums before disbanding or departing. So I'm going to start off here with power pop icons Big Star. This is their first album, released in 1972 on Stax Records. And at this point, in this particular lineup, on the first album, we have Alex Chilton, formerly of the Box Tops. Had a lot of hits there with The Letter and Neon Rainbow and Cry Like a Baby in the mid-60s. Alex Chilton hooked up with his friend Chris Bell, who played guitar and wrote songs. And then Andy Hummel on bass, Jody Stevens joined the band. So they were a four-piece band. And this is a really seminal album in the formation of power pop. A lot of bands have been influenced by this album and this band. You name it. Teenage Fan Club, Cheap Trick, REM, Tom Petty, the list goes on and on. This album is famous for having a song called In the Street, which was the title song for the show called That 70s Show. The lyrics were reconfigured a little bit and it was performed by Cheap Trick, but that's probably the most popular song on this album. Another song too is 13, which has had a lot of airplay on different TV shows and films as well, indie films. But this is just a solid, and it's not only just power pop here. We have great just ballads and kind of folk rock, singer-songwriter kind of stuff. The first side is definitely more rock and roll. Starts off with Feel, and it goes into the Battle of El Goodo, which is just a great Alex Chilton ballad. You've got In the Street, which I spoke about. 13, beautiful ballad. You've got Don't Lie to Me, and then it ends with the India song in side 2. Side 2 kind of takes on a different kind of mood. Starts off with Two Great Rockers, When My Baby's Beside Me, and My Life is Ripe. And then the last 3 or 4 tracks kind of go into this melancholy thing, which really ends the album on a kind of sad note. But the songs are so great. You've got Try Again and a song called Watch the Sunrise, which are just beautiful tracks. The album never went anywhere, but now it's considered one of the greatest albums in power pop. So after this first album, Chris Bell left, and now it was down to a 3-piece with just Alex Chilton. And for me, this is my favorite Big Star album. Radio City came out in early 1974. This is famous for the power pop classic September Girls, which the Bangles and countless others have covered over the years. It's one of those albums that it's just absolutely flawless from beginning to end. It's one of those just perfect guitar pop records. It starts off with Oh My Soul on side 1, Life is White, Way Out West with a great vocal by Jody Stevens, the drummer. And then What's Going On and You Get What You Deserve in side 1. Side 2 is just equally as amazing. Maud Lang, Back of a Car, one of the greatest power pop songs. Daisy Glaze, multi-parts in there. Rocks, She's a Mover, September Girls, Morpha 2, and I'm in Love with a Girl. This is an absolute 5-star masterpiece. So after this album, Big Star was in limbo, and around 1975, it was down to just Jody Stevens, the drummer, and Alex Chilton at this point in the band with a few hired musicians. And this album, Big Star 3, also known as Sisters Lovers, came out in 1978, but the bulk of it recorded in 75. Completely different album than Radio City or Number One Record. This is a really very dark, moody, very, very sad kind of record. Kind of like Tonight's the Night by Neil Young, but maybe a little more melodic. But it's a combination of just harrowing type of songs that are just really interesting, like Kangaroo and Holocaust, coupled with a couple of rockers like You Can't Have Me and Kiss of Me, and then a couple of just beautiful ballads like Blue Moon and Nighttime. Just an absolute stellar 5-star record. And then so it was finally released in 78 by PVC, the small indie label. And then that was it for Big Star. But over the years, over the decades, these 3 albums would be instrumental in alternative rock, guitar pop, power pop bands, you name it. And yeah, one of my absolute favorite bands of all time, Big Star. And that's their 3 albums they released. And then they did put out a reunion album sometime in the early 00s, but it was horrible. It had a couple of guys from the Posies. Alex Chilton didn't seem too into it, kind of half-hearted, and it didn't even deserve the Big Star name, that whatever that record was, In Space or something like that. I remember I purged it as soon as I got it. So The next artist is Jimi Hendrix. Can you think of a better 3-album run? And then that was it for somebody, right? Are You Experienced? Probably the greatest debut of all time. My favorite songs on here these days, I love Lover Confusion. Always loved Wind Cries Mary. Hell, the whole album is just fantastic, right? One of the greatest albums ever. But my personal favorite is Axe as Bold as Love, which came out the following year, or the same year, later in the year of 67. I think this album doesn't get as much commercial play as Are You Experienced, but there's just gems all over it. Up from the Skies, Ain't No Telling, Little Wing, If 6 Was 9. You Got Me Floating. I always wanted to do a cover of that song with a band of mine back in the day. Castles Are Made of Sand, She's So Fine, Bold as Love. An absolute perfect album from Hendrix. Guy was just on fire for a couple of years there and just cranking out non-stop quality music. And this, of course, his final album while he was alive that was released, Electric Ladyland, the double album, equally as good as the previous two. There's a long jam on here, Voodoo Child, with guest stars like Stevie Winwood, Jack Cassidy. But some of my absolute favorites would be like Burning of the Midnight Lamp, Gypsy Eyes, Little Miss Strange. Of course, it has All Along the Watchtower, one of the biggest Dylan covers of all time. Rainy Day, Dream Away. I mean, what can you say? This is just flawless all the way through. Hendrix, 3 perfect albums, and he was gone, unfortunately. And then the posthumous Cry of Love came out in 70 or 71, I believe. Another group that was hugely influential on the punk scene. And these albums are very seminal. The Stooges, Iggy Pop. First Stooges album came out the same week as Woodstock, completely out of context of what was going on in that day and age. Stripped down, bare bones, nasty rock and roll, no holds barred here. No one was doing stage antics like Iggy was back in 1968, 69, and going forward. This album is a total proto-punk classic. 1969, I Want to Be Your Dog. We Will Fall, real like 12-minute brooding, freaky little tune, chanting. You've got No Fun, Real Cool Time, and which always reminded me of the Doors a little bit, kind of that kind of vibe. Not Right, and it ends with Little Doll. Perfect album. What's really cool about these Stooges albums is they all sound different. This is very basic, garagey sounding, produced by John Cale. He adds some piano in there on I Want to Be Your Dog and whatever. But each Stooges album sounds completely different from the next. 1970s Funhouse. This is my favorite. This is completely no holds barred. Just, I think it was recorded live in the studio. It starts off with Down on the Street, Loose, TVI, Dirt on side 1. Side 2 is completely unhinged with 1970, one of my all-time favorite Stooges songs. The great sax solo by Steve McKay. Then you've got the title track, what is it? Funhouse, coming after 1970. And then you have LA Blues, which is kind of the obvious closer, just an absolute barrage of avant-garde noise. Fantastic stuff. And then a few years later, they pretty much had finished at that point with that lineup. You had Ron Ashton in the group and his brother Scott Ashton. Iggy, Dave Alexander left. So a few years went by. There was some interest in Iggy, and long story short, they released Raw Power, produced by David Bowie. Again, another completely different sound for the Stooges. This one is probably the most influential, I would say, for the punk movement in the late 70s. You've got James Williamson on guitar, really raw playing. The production on here has always been controversial. Some people like the Bowie mix in 2007, I believe, or is it 97? Iggy released his mix, which the speakers are just blowing out from the volume. I don't know, I kind of like both mixes. The Bowie one is a little easier to listen to on the ears, but I think probably the Iggy mix is a little more powerful, should we say. But you've got some great tracks on here. Search and Destroy, Gimme Danger, Your Pretty Face Is Going to Hell, Penetration, one of my favorite tracks on the album. Second side, Raw Power, I Need Somebody, Shake Appeal, Death Trip. They did release a couple albums, reunion albums, years later, decades later in the 00s, which I didn't really care for, but those three are totally seminal and should be in any collection. Next artist is Nick Drake. What a sad story Nick Drake is. Incredible talent. I don't think this guy could even write a bad song if he tried. These 3 albums he put out are absolutely flawless from beginning to end. This is his first album from 1969. It's 5 Leaves Left. This is a little more orchestrated than subsequent releases. Gorgeous songs on here. Time Has Told Me with Richard Thompson on guitar. You got Riverman with that beautiful orchestral section there going on. 3 Hours, Way to Blue, Day Is Done. Cello Song on side 2. Thoughts of Mary Jane, Man in a Shed, Fruit Tree, Saturday Sun. Just, no one even cared about this when it was released back in the day. He didn't want to perform, which was another added factor to his unpopularity. But he kept chugging along. Next year, in 1970, he put out an even greater album, in my opinion, Brighter Later, which was produced again by John Cale. And this album has some of his most gorgeous songs. Northern Sky really brings a tear to my eye. A couple of beautiful instrumentals, Introduction, Sunday, Brighter Later. There's a song called Fly. There's a song called Poor Boy, which has this really cool jazz feel to it. He's kind of changing it up a little bit on this second album, adding more jazz flavors and more just different things. At the Chime of a City Clock is gorgeous. One of These Things First. Yeah, Nick could do no wrong in the songwriting department. And then his last album he released while he was still alive, and this was basically it, except for a few tracks released before he died on the subsequent album, Time of No Reply. That's a compilation. Pink Moon. Can any album be more stark than this? It's just him and guitar. No accompaniment, just him and guitar. 30 minutes long. I think it's a little under 30 minutes long, featuring the title track, which was in a Volkswagen commercial, I believe, in the 1990s. And just a lot of really dark tunes, but they're not depressing. They're just really intriguing, these songs. Free Ride is great. Harvest Breed, Parasite. Absolutely seminal, these 3 albums by Nick Drake. Just an absolute, just top-tier songwriter. And now he's kind of like a Van Gogh of folk rock music or folk music. Now he's getting a lot of attention, but better late than never, right? So he's finally getting attention, which is great. And the last one is Buffalo Springfield. 3 amazing albums in a short 2 years. Their first album, self-titled, featuring For What It's Worth. A lot of great tracks like Flying on the Ground Is Wrong, written by Neil Young. One track sung by Neil called Burned. Do I Have to Come Right and Say It? Leave, Out of My Mind. Sit Down, I Think I Love You. Stephen Stills really shines on this album too with that track, and Go and Say Goodbye, and of course For What It's Worth. Very, very dry production though. This is probably sort of what they sounded like live back in the day. I'm sure they sounded a lot more heavier than this. So by the second album, things are starting to fall apart, but the music is getting even better. This album is like just a mishmash of tons of different styles. I think all the principal songwriters recording at different times. This is an absolute masterpiece. Buffalo Springfield again. Mr. Soul by Neil Young. Child's Claim to Fame by Richie Furay. Everydays by Stephen Stills. Beautiful, kind of almost like cosmic, kind of dreamy, kind of dream pop song by Neil Young called Expecting to Fly. Bluebird. I don't think I've ever heard of a live version of Bluebird that even comes close to this studio version here. It's incredible. Hung Upside Down, Sad Memory, Good Time Boy, Rock and Roll Woman, Broken Arrow. What a 5-star masterpiece this is. So they were pretty much done after this, and the next album is just a hodgepodge, and a great hodgepodge at that, of great songs released after they broke up. So we got On the Way Home, one of my favorite Buffalo Springfield songs, written by Neil Young, sung by Richie Furay. It's So Hard to Wait, Pretty Girl Why by Stephen Stills, Special Care, The Hour of Night Quite Rain, Questions, Kind Woman by Richie Furay, just another stellar album. So those are 5 examples, 5 artists that released 3 stellar albums in their lifetime before they disbanded. Let me know if you have any to add to the comment section. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed, just press that button. And we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.